Hello, welcome in. This is Terapod number 7, all about Bloodborne, and I am joined by friend of the show, Trilorim. How you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me once again.
Yes, I think we can say that at this point, right? You're a friend of the show, friend of the
Yeah,
channel. I think you've earned that status.
I've dropped in here and there for a podcast or two. Always good to be here.
Absolutely. So Trilorim, aka my pal Leland, just had the pleasure of turning the clock back to 2015 and doing his first ever complete Bloodborne playthrough. So, like me, you're a huge FromSoft fan, but you've dabbled here and there. You're aware of Bloodborne, of course, like its reputation precedes it, but you hadn't actually had a chance to sit down with the game from beginning to end until like the last 30 days.
That is correct. For those who don't know, I started playing Soul series from Soft Games with Sekiro. Sekiro was actually my first game. Yeah, from there I just kind of delved right into it. Played pretty much every single game, with the exception of Bloodborne. I got a chance to I played Demon Souls with my brother, did a full playthrough of that with him, but I do not have a PlayStation. So that's kind of been the one thing inhibiting my experience of Bloodborne. And for my birthday, one of my good friends loaned me his PS4. He is also a huge fan of the FromSoft games and was like, "This is unacceptable. If you're into FromSoft, you need to play Bloodborne." So,
and in
yeah,
true
pretty much
2015 fashion, it was on a PS4. It was not on a PS5,
yeah,
as it
exactly.
should be.
Yeah, as it should be. We just before hopping on a call here determined it's been pretty much exactly a month that I've had Bloodborne, and I completed my full first playthrough. Did most of the Chalice dungeons. I did the full DLC, every boss in the base game. So try to fit it all in this last month.
Yeah, and I think that's cool because you probably did experience it to a degree as you would have if you feverishly dove in back in
Mhm.
2015 when it came out, right? Like it would have been a really condensed playthrough, a lot of long sessions, kind of a whirlwind. So even though you already knew about a lot of the ingredients of Bloodborne, I'm sure it still felt like a special first playthrough in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Isn't it fun too, man, when you just like snooze for whatever reason on an older game and then you get to rediscover it and re-experience it years later? Like there's almost something fun about that. I always kind of enjoy that when that happens with me.
Yeah, because it felt like I was kind of in my own little bubble. Like you said, throwing it back to I time traveled for a little bit. And it
Right.
definitely was that way, where like the whole past month, I pretty much have been playing exclusively Bloodborne. But yeah, I've been popping in here and there with Elden Ring. I've got a new co-op run going with a buddy of mine. I also, for whatever reason, this past weekend, well, actually, I do know the reason because I think it was Saturday morning. I fired up the old PS4 and I was planning to just bang my head against the door with Orphan of Kos all day. I was like, okay, I'm just going to dedicate my Saturday fighting this boss because it's going to take
Getting
forever.
smashed in the head with a placenta on a
Yep.
Saturday morning.
And
Yeah.
because the previous night, I think it was Friday night, I had like a 6 hour play session and I just reached Orphan of Kos and just was getting just demolished for like, an hour straight. I was like, okay, I'm going to have a rough time. I'm going to have a rough go this tomorrow. And I ended up waking up, firing up the PS4, beating Orphan of Kos, Moon Presence, and Gehrman all in a row first try. So it was like, I've got a whole weekend that I dedicated. What do I do? And so I played through Dark Souls 3 again in a weekend,
Naturally.
naturally. So
Naturally.
I've been kind of all in with FromSoft the last couple weeks. So it's been fun.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, man. And yeah, we were talking about I think the structure here. So I think we're pretty much just gonna go beat by beat and we're just
Mhm.
gonna talk through the game because I'm selfishly interested to hear all of your initial impressions on this level, this
Mhm.
weapon, this boss, right? So I think we're just gonna go beat by beat through pretty much the whole game in the DLC. And a lot of the people who listen to this will know my background with From games. I started with DS1 in late 2011, like everyone at first. I was clueless, fearfully stumbling through these games. And then after DS2, so like 2014, 2015, started to become a lot more confident in my understanding of these games, how to play them calmly, patiently, how to
Mhm.
exploit them. I formally started, I was actually thinking about this the other day. So I formally started speedrunning DS3 like the week after Ring City came out in 2017, and then Bloodborne at that time too. So I actually started with DS3 and then Bloodborne later in 2017. No wild claims to fame here because the world record is still an hour faster than my time. But what that really means is I do know this game well. I know this game in weird ways. And, I've been gaming since I was like 3 or 4 years old. And I would venture a pretty safe guess that next to DS3, Bloodborne is probably my second most played game ever. I think I'm probably somewhere north of like 1,500 hours, like maybe closer to 2,000. I still run through it casually at least a couple times a year. I still enjoy the game a ton. I enjoy experimenting with weapons, the fashion, the music, the art direction. It's not my favorite Soulsborne game, but I do think it's one of my top 10 games for sure.
I think
Like,
you and I share an affinity for Dark Souls 3, correct?
yeah, right. Which to some people is so triggering. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
like Dark Souls 3 more than Bloodborne. It's like, yes, I do, and it's
You know,
okay if you feel differently.
I saw a post the other day, and I think it's very true, and it probably rings true for a lot of people that kind of the first game that they really get into and really clicks for them ends up being their favorite game.
Mm,
For me, I started with Sekiro, but then I hit a boss. I don't know which boss it was, but I got stuck on a boss and was watching a bunch of Dark Souls 3 videos at the time and was like, you know what? Let's check and see if it's on sale. And it was on sale. And so I picked it up immediately, jumped into Dark Souls 3, and was just hooked. And that became my game that, I sunk hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours into
right.
endlessly. And because of that, it's got this very special place in my heart, which is why coming off of my Bloodborne playthrough, I kind of wanted to return to that because they were both developed right at the same time, correct? Like they had a very similar
Mhm.
development cycle. They both were being developed kind of, alongside one another. So I thought it'd be interesting to go back and see if some of the kind of quirks of Bloodborne, some of the mechanics that I thought were that kind of popped up, and we can kind of get into that as we
Mhm.
go through the different areas, if they translated into Dark Souls 3. And it's interesting. I found that there were so many parallels between the two games, even though I think in a lot of people's minds they're pretty, I don't know, kind of polar opposites. Even though they were developed and kind of released around the same time, they have very different feels, obviously very different flavors, but they've got a lot of the same DNA.
Right. Yeah. And I've been saying that for years. And because I think people don't like, people might overlook that a little bit, at least based on conversations I've had. They're the two From games during the Miyazaki era that are most similar, right? Like
Hmm.
From's proprietary game engine that they've, you can sense that same engine when you play Demons on PS3, and you can
Hmm.
sense that same skeleton, that same framework when you're playing Elden Ring on PC or a next gen console. Like they've always been iterating on that same engine, but the engine was closest for Bloodborne and DS3.
Hmm.
DS3 it was iterated on a little bit. Like DS3 obviously like has the it's unlocked beyond 1080p and things like that. Dark Souls 3 has a little more like fidelity to it. But those two games look and feel so similar. And I've always said I think Dark Souls 3 is a lot better because of
Hmm.
Bloodborne. Like Bloodborne made the final Dark Souls game a lot better. And yeah, like Bloodborne's interesting because it's really an action game with some tacked on RPG elements, right? Like
Hmm.
kind of in the way Sekiro is too. But then it's interesting because in a lot of ways, Bloodborne feels like a spiritual successor to Demon Souls. And I believe at one point it was rumored that it actually was conceived of as a sequel to Demon Souls and then changed during the concepting phase into like its own IP. But again, like you said, you feel its DNA all over Lothric. You still feel that DNA in Elden Ring. So it's probably the watershed game for From Software. Like I really think of their games in like sort of like a classic era and a modern era, and I feel like the modern era begins in 2015 with Bloodborne. So it's a really
Right.
interesting split in that Miyazaki era of From Soft.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I'd never, because obviously with Demon Souls, a lot of people make the, you go chronologically, you make those connections, and Dark Souls 3 is a lot of people see that as the love song, and for all the Souls games previous to that. But yeah, it's interesting to see its DNA in Bloodborne, and I had no idea that it was at one point potentially kind of a conceptual successor or sequel to Demon Souls. That's interesting.
So I feel like it might be helpful just to tee us off before we
Hmm.
get into the sick room in Iosefka's clinic to just talk about what Bloodborne is. Because I think in a lot of ways, Bloodborne has been sort of a molehill turned into a mountain. People act like
Right.
it's so complicated it could never be
Hmm.
understood, and it's just so weird and it's just so obtuse. And it is in some ways. But in a lot of ways, you can also fairly easily get your arms around a lot of the big concepts at play. And I actually think there's a little less ambiguity in Bloodborne than some of their other games, which might seem ironic because it seems like Bloodborne's maybe the most confusing, but I don't think it is.
Hmm.
Like I would argue there's far more ambiguity in like Elden Ring, and you could maybe even argue in Demon Souls in ways. Like Bloodborne is actually fairly spelled out. So it all is about Byrgenwerth, right? Like
Hmm.
there's this research academy called Byrgenwerth, and Byrgenwerth is led by this guy named Willem. And the scholars of Byrgenwerth explore this labyrinth under present day Yharnam and discover the blood of the great ones, who to me are less like gods and more like higher evolved beings. But that's, you could semantically debate that. But anyway, there's an entire civilization down in this labyrinth system, which we know as the Chalice Dungeons. And these humanoids are the Pthumerians and appear to have benefited and changed and evolved from this blood. So the scholars are like, hey, maybe we'll grow tall and strong and weird like them if we also consume the blood. And that obviously does not happen. They become beasts when they consume the blood. So the scholars, they want to better understand these great ones, right? So they find this little fishing village where a great one named Kos washes up on the shore and is worshipped by the people of the village, the fishing hamlet. So these hunters associated with the academy, including Gehrman and Maria, go there to the hamlet and essentially commit genocide. They slaughter the people. They're looking for eyes, and they kill Kos, take its unborn baby, and begin to understand that what the Great Ones are really after are children. That they're like so evolved, their one kryptonite is that they can't have offspring as simply as we do. So Willem and one of his pupils, Lawrence, have this philosophical conflict over the blood. You actually get a glimpse at that after you defeat Vicar Amelia, and you walk up to the altar and you get that little cutscene of Willem and Lawrence in the past talking. And the debate is, will they become truly enlightened by and evolve by consuming the blood, or is there another way? Is there another path? Is the blood too dangerous? Should the blood be feared? So Lawrence is like, hey, whatever, I'm punk rock, I'm going to do my own thing. So he breaks off from the academy and founds the Healing Church, which is obsessed with this process of blood ministration. And you start to realize as you're playing the game, they're also obsessed with like power and controlling Yharnam and its people. The church is experimenting on people, right? They're policing the people like it's a really bad situation. And the church ends up kidnapping another baby and using that to beckon this great one known as the moon presence, right? They're like essentially baiting it almost like fishing out in a boat on a lake. And that causes the moon to turn red, and reality and the past and the future and the dream world, everything starts fraying and fusing and just going to hell. And in Yharnam, beasts are ravaging the city. The hunters are trying to control the beast. And then you show up, the player character, looking for something called pale blood. And you get to town, you receive a transfusion from a blood minister, and then you wake up and essentially have amnesia inside of the clinic where you are. And that's when the game starts. So that's like sort of the rough 101 on what's the deal with Bloodborne, what's going on in this game. Why don't we roll right into who was your character in this game? What kind of character did you create? And maybe talk a little bit about like this game's tutorial versus the other game's tutorials.
So my character, and this is pretty vanilla. I do this for every FromSoft game that I start. I always name my character Leland, and I think this kind of started with Pokemon. I'm a lifelong Pokemon fan, and I always, in those games, it's a bit more natural to name yourself as the trainer. But that's translated to FromSoft games for me. My first character that I always roll is going to be myself and kind of how I would go through this world. It helps me with my immersion. I didn't roll anything super crazy this time. I basically just created a guy with a cool little monocle and a sweet mustache because I'm these days rocking a mustache, and pretty much just jumped right into it, right into Iosefka's clinic, right?
Yep. Always loved the like it's starting with the transfusion and you wake up and you're kind of disoriented and then there's
Mhm.
the note next to your bed table that says
Mhm.
seek pale blood to transcend the hunt, which people have like, debated. Did you, the player character, actually write that note to yourself? Pale blood's kind of this what's the term? Like the MacGuffin, right? It's sort of a red herring, like it's sort of a nothing in the
Right.
game. It's a catalyst, but yeah, you wake up, you see that note, and you go down the stairs. Just talk to me a little bit about like starting the game. Did you run by the werewolf? Did you kill the werewolf? What
I I
happened?
I got close to killing the werewolf. Yeah, it brought its health down pretty much to nothing, and then it gave me the old one too, and I woke up in the hunter's dream.
Right.
But yeah, that first little starting area is it's like the perfect introduction to kind of the just the overall setting of Bloodborne. I think you're in this little clinic. If you decide to fight the the werewolf, you can't go out into the world just yet. It's very like I'm trying to figure out a good way of describing this, but at least I had a lot of these moments in Bloodborne during my first playthrough where you find places of solace, these rooms, a lot of times within these buildings throughout Yharnam. It sets the scale of the world. I think is kind of what I'm getting at before you enter into this giant kind of weird Lovecraftian, Victorian era setting. You're kind of set within this one clinic, and it puts you in this mind space of kind of being that solitary hunter, one of the few hunters left, I guess. I don't know. I just think it really set the tone in a way that you don't see in a lot of other FromSoft games, where typically the tutorial level, I guess Demon Souls is a good example, thrown right into a level, you navigate that level, and then you fight the boss. You fight the tutorial boss. So it was interesting having a tutorial area where it's not a boss, it's just a standard enemy in this incredibly confined, solitary, dark space. So it did a really good job of putting me in that different mindset than I had previously experienced with FromSoft games.
I really like that point about how there's so much distance between you and the first optional or mandatory boss when you wake up in the clinic compared to From's other games. There is
Mhm.
sort of a semi-scripted death with the werewolf, right? A little bit like they did
Mhm.
with the grafted scion in Elden Ring, but the grafted scion is still presented to you as a boss. So
Right.
it's a boss few players will actually defeat, but that's okay because it's a scripted death. And the werewolf sort of functions in that way too. Obviously, they expected fewer players to actually continue into Central Yharnam, go up the ladder, hear the Cleric Beast shriek, and all of that. They expected most players would get smashed by that werewolf and wake up in the Hunter's Dream before even
Mhm.
leaving the clinic. So that's what happened to you. So waking up
Mhm.
in the Hunter's Dream. What are some thoughts on the Hunter's Dream? You meet the messengers. They're there to offer
Mhm.
you some weapons. You went with the cleaver, right?
Yes, I did the cleaver and the hunter's pistol, and those were my tried and trues all the way through.
Well, it's
I
the best weapon
experiment.
in the game. That's the crazy
Yeah.
thing. Like it's a little bit like
Yeah.
starting DS3 with the Sellsword Twin Blades, right? Like
Mhm.
technically, in terms of optimization, it is like the most effective weapon you could use because of its damage and its speed. So I like that. From is not afraid of doing that. I mean, even in Sekiro, right? You basically start the game with the one
Yeah.
weapon you take to the end of the game. So they're not afraid to give you that kind of power right off the bat because it's that like you and I have talked about that a lot. It's actually a lot less about the weapons and it's more about you when you're playing these games.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I was just gonna draw that the parallel to Sekiro in that yeah, you're set with the one katana. That's what you got the whole game, and it's more about learning the mechanics of the combat systems, and that's what I very much found true for Bloodborne as well. Learning the parries, learning how to do the trick weapons, which obviously I experimented a little bit with some of the other ones. Ludwig's Holy Blade was my secondary weapon for my entire playthrough. I added the like fire blood gem to it, so I had this like fiery holy blade
Mhm.
as backup to my cleaver in certain cases. But yeah, I thought it was cool being able to just kind of stick with one weapon. I guess in my mind, kind of played through it similarly to Sekiro in that regard, where I wasn't super focused on getting new equipment, even though the fashion souls are very good in this game. It was fun playing around with that a little bit, but those stats don't matter that much compared to other games, I would argue. So it's more about just kind of building a character you think looks good, but overall, how you fight these bosses is going to be fairly similar regardless of your fit and what your weapon is looking like. Obviously, there are a couple of outliers in terms of weapons. I know that there's the one, or like the beast claws or whatever, and there's like the auger of Ebrietas, I think is the
Hmm.
alien arm.
Yeah, right. Because like every weapon can rally, right? You can get your HP back with any weapon. Every weapon can transform. Yeah, I think the cleaver and the pistol are perfect. I mean, that was what I did for my first playthrough. You know, it's like it's the I think the best way to play through the game for the first time. And then on subsequent playthroughs, you start messing around with like the cause parasite and the whirligig saw, and it's like, oh, okay, this is
Hmm.
Bloodborne. This is cool. But yeah, so you and when you get to the Hunter's Dream, it's obviously a very surreal place. You meet Gehrman, right?
Hmm.
He's in the little church. And you know, it's interesting you were saying like maybe one of the last of the hunters. You're really not a hunter until you show up in the dream and Gehrman tells you you are, right? Like
That's true. Yep.
you're just some random bastard from a foreign land. You even have that foreign garb on.
Hmm.
And you know, Gehrman's just like, oh, welcome to your new home, right? Like, don't worry about things. Just go out and kill a few beasts. It's for your own good. It's what hunters do. You'll get used to it. And it's a little like, what's going on here?
But yeah, I love the Hunter's Dream. I think it's absolutely one of the best hub areas FromSoft has made. I mean, just visually, it's just so stunning. Like the moment you get there, you're in this very secluded area, and you see this like field of flowers, all these tombstones, this mysterious doll. It's just got this. There's just something special to it, where it just draws you in immediately, and you can tell it's going to be your home for the playthrough.
Well, and you can't quite tell when you like look out beyond the fences. It's like, are you floating? Are you in the sky? Are there clouds
Hmm.
below you? There's those pillars. They actually look exactly like the pillars behind Aldia's Keep in DS2. It's almost like the same
Mm-hmm.
exact, you know, model. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I also believe it's the only hub in all of the Soulsborne games where you have a proper boss battle too.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
But other
And
than that, you feel super safe, right? I mean, that's the idea. Like
yeah.
they're sanctuaries and very, you know, violent, stressful game worlds. So I think between the, you know, what is it, the cello or whatever instruments being used to play that, you know, beautiful theme song, and you know the tree and the foliage and just the stones, it's very like morbidly serene. Like I
Hmm.
always love the Hunter's Dream.
Yeah. Serene is a really good word for it. And all of the best FromSoft hub areas have that homey feeling. You know, you need
Yeah.
to have your place of sanctuary, and it does it perfectly.
So you bounce back to what, the sick room lamp, you
Hmm.
run out into Central Yharnam. Let's talk about Central Yharnam because
Hmm.
it's obviously one of the highlights of the game. You know, it's one of those examples of a developer putting their best foot forward.
Oh, 100%.
It's in my opinion like still one of the best levels they've ever designed because of how big it is, how complicated it is, how many branching paths there are. Yeah, just talk to me about Central Yharnam.
Yeah, it is 100% without a doubt my favorite level in the game.
Yeah.
There are a lot of really cool areas in Bloodborne that we're going to talk about for sure. Yeah, wow, what an area to start the game with. And yeah, what you were saying, the level design, all the intricate pathways, you know, it gives you a lot of those like, oh, this is where I am moments where you're going through this big, you know, you're going down staircases, you're climbing ladders, and then you open a gate and you're like, oh, like this is a shortcut. Like I know where I am, and then you can go back where you came, and it's just the perfect example of like an ideal FromSoft level of in terms of being highly interconnected. You know, encouraging that sense of exploration that I think we all look for in a FromSoft level. It just sets such a good example for the tone of the game too. Again, touching on those kind of gothic Victorian vibes that are just so flavorful in Central Yharnam.
Yeah, it's almost like a mix between Prague and London, you know, like
Hmm.
architecturally.
Hmm.
Like it's a little bit of Prague, it's a little bit of London. The buildings look a little more like Prague. The people sound like they have like Cockney accents and stuff. So it's
Hmm.
the few people who knock Bloodborne's art direction, most of them will say, well, the game's just too dark. There's not enough color. I don't agree with that, but I think especially when you start the game, right? Like the sun's setting, like night is setting in. This night of the hunt is beginning. I think the fact that color is used sparingly in Bloodborne is like one of its strengths, right? Because when you see color, whereas in Elden Ring, there's color everywhere and it's beautiful. But
Hmm.
in Bloodborne, like color really means something when you see it, like the red moon. It has like deeper meaning. And even when it's dark, like when you're slinking through the alleys of Central Yharnam and it is super dark, like it reminds you this is a bit of a horror game too.
Yeah, it does like a great job of kind of easing you into that, the classic Lovecraftian vibes that are associated with Bloodborne, and that the main focus is that kind of Victorian Gothic horror, and not a lot of those kind of otherworldly elements are apparent quite yet. There are allusions to it here and there.
Yeah, they actually kept that a secret, shockingly. I don't know how they did it back in the day, but they never showed any of the cosmic stuff like the kin,
Mhm,
Ebrietas or Amygdala. They never showed
mhm.
off any of that in the trailers. It was just dudes with torches and pitchforks. And it was like, oh, this is like a London werewolves kind of thing. And it's so much more than that. And they somehow kept that under wraps, which I think is really
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah, and they're still able to kind of keep it under wraps in Central Yharnam, which is cool. That they like kind of slowly ease you into that kind of throughout the game. It like gradually ramps up, and I think it's just like the perfect approach to that genre.
Sure. A little sneak peek of a video I'm cooking up for the nearish future is about how every FromSoft game is literally an uphill battle. Because when you think about it, especially the opening areas, you're always going uphill. Like in Demon Souls, it's the gates of Boletaria, you're going up. In Dark Souls 1, you're going up into Undead Burg and an Undead Parish. You're always going uphill. In Sekiro, you're literally climbing out of a well at the beginning. Think about that first view of Limgrave in Elden Ring. The entire landscape graduates. I mean, you can see endgame areas from where you are, and those first steps toward the Tree Sentinel and where the first merchant is, you're always going uphill. And Bloodborne does that really well too. I think there is something subtly psychological there that From's doing, right? They would never come out and say it because that's how they are. I think that's what we love about them. But Central Yharnam is an uphill battle. When you step out of the clinic all the way to Gascoigne's boss arena, you're always going uphill, right? Of course, there's a staircase down or a drop down here or there, but generally you're moving up, you're
Mhm.
fighting up. And I just always thought that was really interesting. And especially as you get into the thick of Central Yharnam and you're dealing with mobs, right? Like you're not just dealing with one crazed Yharnamite, but you're dealing with two. One has fire, one has a rifle, then there's a dog. They gradually throw more and more at you.
Mhm.
It's awesome. It is. It's just like them showing off at how good they are at enemy placement, level design. It's so much fun, even after playing the game 100 times. Like Central Yharnam is always fun. That feeling of like running out of the clinic with a weapon, and it's like, here we go.
Yep. And then yeah, there's the moment where you eventually reach the bridge and have to take on the Cleric Beast, which is the first boss that I encountered in the game, and obviously a lot of people's first boss that they encounter, even though it very well could be Gascoigne. Through all the exploration,
Sure.
people could totally miss Cleric Beast and wind their way down into the Gascoigne fight. But yeah, Cleric Beast, very interesting, kind of first boss in the game. My experience was, I don't know, I felt kind of like I cheesed it in the sense where, for whatever reason, my first fight with Cleric Beast, he ended up in like a corner on the bridge, or he was like kind of stuck in a corner in the bridge, and you just pretty much have to get underneath him
Yep.
or behind him, and I was pretty much just good to go. So yeah, obviously not the most difficult first boss in a FromSoft game, but I think a super cool intro. Him just like flying down, screaming his lungs out, crashing into the bridge.
Yeah. A little
Is
like the
like,
Asylum demon, right? Jumping down at you
mm-hmm,
in DS1. But yeah, more difficult, a little more dynamic,
mm-hmm,
a lot more intimidating, cooler design. There are quite a few of like the big chunky bosses
mm-hmm.
in Bloodborne, but when even they're big and chunky and you can just chip away at them, fairly easily with one of your hunter's weapons, they're still like always cool designs. Like even that
Yeah,
very first Cleric Beast is an
yeah.
awesome design.
Yeah, and we'll obviously touch on a lot of those bosses later, but real quick, I just wanted to say in a lot of instances, you pretty much just need to get behind them and you're good to go. Obviously, there's some AoEs you need to deal with. Like, I think the Cleric Beast has like a scream or something like that is an AoE, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, with a lot of those big beast looking bosses, they're super cool design, but are easy to kind of overcome.
Well, why don't we talk about Gascoigne? You make it across the bridge. the big trolley bridge, and then you make your way up and meet Gascoigne, who's a deranged hunter, right? And he's lost his way. He's hacking at corpses. Did you meet his daughter or get into that quest at all before you encountered the boss, or did you just make it to the boss arena?
I did, yeah. And I was aware of going into this playthrough. I had watched, playthroughs and videos about Bloodborne, so it wasn't a total blind playthrough, and I was aware of kind of Gascoigne's backstory and his quest line, his daughter's quest line, rather. So yeah, there's obviously the music box you can use for his fight, which I didn't end up. I think I went back to do her quest line or something afterwards. I forget the whole how it all went down.
They kind of bring that back with Margaret's Shackle and Elden Ring, right? It kind of does the same thing. Like it temporarily,
you can use that.
Stuns the boss for you.
Stun the boss for a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, which I like that, right? Like you get the first time player, they get rewarded for exploring the world. That first boss could be a little less intimidating, and there's actually a really cool quest associated with it too.
Yeah, to kind of fill out Gascoigne's backstory and I don't know, super cool lore implications there. But yeah, what a fight! It's easily one of my favorite fights in the game, just because I think it's again one of those good early game FromSoft fights that kind of really sets the tone for the rest of the game. Those are always just the best. Like for me, Gundyr, Godric, they're top of the charts for me, and it all has to do with their design and letting the player know kind of what the tone is going to be for boss fights throughout this game, and Gascoigne just does such a good job of that.
Yeah, and I think unlike Cleric Beast, which again has that kind of big, nice, chunky hitbox, that's why Gascoigne holds up so well, because you're fighting an enemy a lot like yourself. You're fighting a person with two legs. I mean, that's what Sekiro is by and large, right? Like we're so conditioned throughout the Souls games to fighting these big monsters, so it's kind of a breath of fresh air when you walk in. It's like, this is who I'm fighting. Of course, phase 3 he goes beast mode on you,
yeah,
but
right.
still he's fast. He'll parry you, and he's a tough target to hit. And you can kind of use those tombstones throughout that little graveyard outside of the tomb of Oedon as shields, or you can get caught up on them and he can wreck you as a result. So it's an interesting little boss arena too.
But yeah, Gascoigne is absolutely a top tier fight for me in Bloodborne, and a big part of that is, like you mentioned, he can parry you, and it teaches the first time player, the value of the parry. Obviously, exploring Central Yharnam, you kind of use your gun and kind of start to slowly understand that it has that parry quality, but you don't really fully understand just how strong it is for the first time until Gascoigne parries you and takes out like all your health in one go.
Right.
So for players who like aren't privy to parrying, obviously me being well experienced with Souls games, I immediately took to parrying everything in sight. But for players who don't have that background knowledge, going into Gascoigne, you immediately are like, okay, I can get a parry off and it'll take off a solid chunk of his health, and it is just so satisfying. Like the parrying in this game is just next level good. Obviously Sekiro, the parry mechanic is huge in that game and is also equally satisfying, but there's just something so special about landing a solid parry, even on like random enemies throughout your journey in Bloodborne. Like I was parrying left and right just to do it.
Yeah, that sound effect is like Pavlovian, right? It's like a bell. It's just it's so good. And right, and that's what's so interesting about Bloodborne is they got a lot more generous with the parry window versus Demon Souls and Dark Souls.
Yeah,
and made it like a core mechanic in the game versus just this, kind of more advanced counterattack technique that you can do in Souls games. It's like now this is just part of gameplay. And I think that's really cool. And there's still a lot of nuance to it. But the average player, picking up Bloodborne for the first time, they'll probably start parrying by accident and then be like, oh, this is cool. And then, right, Gascoigne, like you said, he's doing it to you. Like he's essentially doing to you what you need to do to him and other enemies and other bosses. And then it's so interesting because then in phase 2, he transforms the axe because he's a hunter. He's got a transforming hunter's weapon. And then you're dealing with a enemy with a lot of reach. And then phase 3, you're dealing with a beast. So it's a really great way of introducing you to the kinds of AIs that you're going to need to deal with in this game. It's a really like the perfect tutorial boss. And I remember this was a couple years ago but looking at PlayStation trophy statistics, and this number
Hmm.
could be skewed for a pretty good reason. But I want to say Gascoigne actually had the lowest completion rate based on all of the games on PS5 when I last
Hmm.
checked, like on the PlayStation Network. That like
Interesting.
that success rate, right? Like how many players beat Father Gascoigne
Right.
versus how many beat The Last Giant or how many beat insert early first mandatory boss. And Gascoigne was the lowest success rate. I wonder if that's because Bloodborne has been part of like the PS Plus program. So if you have PS Plus, you can actually download Bloodborne for free. So I'm wondering if like a lot of players, just
Right.
video game
Just
players, yeah, maybe they
yeah.
just tried it even if they weren't from fans. Maybe they didn't stick with it. That might
Right.
have skewed that number a little bit, but I think it still speaks though to him being a pretty serious gatekeeper.
Yeah.
So Cathedral Ward, I feel like some people lump Central Yarnum and Cathedral Ward together, but Cathedral Ward is definitely its own level. You beat Gascoigne. Gascoigne's wife Viola, fun fact, is dead on the roof next to him, so that's cool.
Hmm.
He probably killed her, right? She's out looking for him. Daughter's home alone, and she actually has the jewel on her that was clearly a gift from him at one point before he went mad. And you can actually use that jewel as a blood gem, which is pretty cool. But I always thought that was a little funny though. To get into Cathedral Ward, you actually have to go back to the Hunter's Dream and buy the item from the Bath Messengers
Oh, that's
for like
right.
10,000 echoes or whatever it is. I always thought it
Yeah,
was a
it's the
little silly.
key.
It's kind of like the crests of Artorias a little bit in
Hmm.
DS1, where you just have to open a gate. But whereas in DS1, there's other ways into that area. You have no choice. You have to go back. You have to buy that to get into Cathedral Ward. But then Cathedral Ward is awesome.
Oh yeah. It's home number two in this game. It's another little safe haven in the middle of the surrounding chaos. And I try to do some of the quest lines. I know that there are like 4 or 5 different people you can send to Oedon Chapel.
Right, which that's what we're talking about. Obviously,
Yeah,
Cathedral
yeah.
Ward itself is not much of a safe haven,
Yeah,
but
right.
Odin Chapel
Oedon
definitely
Chapel,
is.
the
It's sort
first
of
area
your
that you enter into.
right. It's almost like it's like a 1B hub or something.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love the little chapel dweller guy. He's just such a funny character, and yeah, I think I did the old lady's quest line, which is just you just send her there, and then Arianna, I think her name was the prostitute, right?
Yeah, that's the
Uh,
implication.
her quest line, which is pretty sad.
There's some other
um,
pretty weird implications about Ariana too, but I don't know. I don't know if you've delved into that. We can always
mhm.
talk about that later. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
it is
don't.
really cool how you can send all of these
Mhm.
NPCs to the chapel. Alternatively, you can also send some people to Iosefka's clinic, which
Right,
has a very good
Iosefka.
outcome. Yes.
Yeah, with and I think when I got to Iosefka's clinic again later in the game, I know that as you send NPCs there, they become the celestial emissary dudes.
Right.
I feel like there was one there, and I don't remember. I didn't send anyone there intentionally because I had a feeling that something bad might be going down with old Iosefka.
Yeah, there's a little alien dude in
Hmm.
there or dudette waiting for you. But yeah, Cathedral Ward though, really cool in the chapel. A lot of little quests.
Hmm.
Quests that you can really miss out on if you progress, classic from fashion. You progress the game, you get deeper into night, the sky starts changing. You can't do a lot of that anymore. But
Yeah, and I really tried my best to try to hit up as many quest lines as I could, with this being my kind of first playthrough. I was very intentional with those quest lines. I was pulling up the wiki to make sure I wasn't screwing up the quest lines I had going on just because I wanted to I did want to experience them. And like I said, this wasn't a true blind playthrough. I didn't feel guilty about using the wiki to try to hit all these points in the NPC quest lines, but there were definitely a couple that I missed for the chapel. I think there's there's the old woman that I got, but there's an old man. I think there's that deranged stranger that can come in and kill everyone. I guess
mhm.
I didn't find him. I missed that quest line. So yeah, new game plus. I'll have to I'll have to hunt him down, send him to the the chapel.
Yeah, it's you're thinking of the suspicious beggar
Yeah.
NPC who's in the woods.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a funny little wrinkle and like so easily missed when you're playing
Hmm.
the game. Yeah, Cathedral Ward, really cool. Quite complicated too. I think when I think of Cathedral Ward, I always think of like that center plaza with the fountain, but there's a lot of little passageways and then another big climb up to the main cathedral where, of course, Amelia is.
Mhm.
Yeah, did you mess around much in Cathedral Ward, or did you basically beeline for Amelia?
No, I actually spent quite a bit of time kind of going down each of the different paths before taking on Amelia. And yeah, it's not quite as interconnected as Central Yharnam,
Right.
but it is cool that there are a lot of different branching pathways that lead you to other areas. Like it is all very interconnected as far as the different lanterns that can send you to. I forget all the exact areas, but there's Old Yharnam. I think you can get to Hemwick Charnel Lane, correct?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
I always suspected that the bridge where you fight the Cleric Beast, I'm pretty sure that was meant to connect to
mm,
Cathedral Ward. You know, like if you clipped out of the
right,
game, that
right.
bridge would lead to Cathedral Ward. I always wondered,
Interesting.
like, was that would that maybe have been like too hard for them to load or something at the time? And they maybe because there's even that little door and there's like a
Hmm.
gate at the end. And of course you can't use them. I think any new player walks over and suspects to be able to, they can keep going, but you can't. So I
Right,
think
that
the
is really
game,
interesting.
yeah, they might have even wanted it to be even more connected than it already is, and it's already
Mm.
super connected.
But yeah, I really enjoyed Cathedral Ward area, and yeah, Amelia was she's in one of my top bosses in this game.
Oh
Um,
yeah?
not one of the more difficult. I will say I beat her first try, but I really like her design. I like the Cathedral arena. I think it's a very like I love that opening scene where you see her in her human form. Like I think
Oh,
it's one of the coolest cutscenes in Bloodborne. So she's flavor wise at the top of my list, even though yeah, one of the easier fights. And again, it goes back to that all the beast bosses are kind of, in my mind at least, lumped into this category of fairly. I don't know. There's just something about their design that for me was lacking. Like I guess I'd lump like Ebrietas, Vicar Amelia, one Reborn, all those kind of like big monstrous things into this category of just get behind them a
yeah,
little bit.
yeah,
And so yeah, Amelia wasn't the most difficult fight, but I just think she's cool. She's just super cool.
yeah. No, that like you said, that cutscene is awesome. The implication is that she's probably like a pupil of Lawrence's.
Mm,
She has the gold pendant on her, which is a progression item in the game, and it says something to the effect of this is passed down through like high-ranking members of the healing church, like vicars, and
hmm.
it opens the gates of Byrgenwerth. So like really important item you get, and you even get a glimpse, like I think we were talking about maybe before we started recording, like that little cutscene, or I might have mentioned it earlier between Willem and Lawrence, which is interesting to think like
Hmm.
that was pre DLC, right? Like when the base game came out, there was no DLC. You never fought Lawrence. Maybe Lawrence was meant to be the bloodletting beast in the Chalice dungeons. That people have always speculated about that a little bit.
Mm,
But yeah, just like a cool moment where you begin to get a little more insight into the world and the
hmm.
factions and maybe what's going on here.
Pun intended. That
Oh my
makes
God, I totally did that by accident. That's right. Yeah. And if you get too much insight, you'll just go mad. You'll
Yeah,
just go
pretty much.
crazy. But Cathedral Ward's cool, and like Alfred is like a lore dump machine.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
He also gives you the flame sprayer after you defeat Gascoigne, after you talk to him, which is kind of cool.
Yep. Yeah, and I didn't end up using the flame sprayer too much, but
It's kind of a
it's
novelty, right?
it's a novelty fun. Yeah, it's a fun little flamethrower weapon. How can you hate it?
So where'd you progress after Amelia?
I think I went into Old Yharnam
Hmm.
from there, which yeah, I'm a fan. Just that
Yeah.
moment where you open the doors or you read the note that's like "Do not enter,"
Yeah,
basically.
Jura's. I think the implication is
Yeah,
Djura, the hunter on the roof, put that there.
yeah, Djura put that there, and then when you open the gates, you have this moment where it feels like you're entering another area. You can kind of walk around a little bit, and then you reach a point, and then Djura just starts to like talk to you. Like you hear this voice off in the distance, basically telling you to like go home.
Do
Do
that, hunter.
yeah, like piss off. Like you were not supposed to be here. And of course, you naturally just ignore it, continue forth. And he's like, "All right, I warned you." And then he just lets it spray with the Gatling gun. It is just such a impactful moment and just such a fun moment running through Old Yarnum while Jura's just like letting it spray. It was just fun. It's a good moment.
Yeah, and you can actually befriend Djura too. There's another like sort of way where you can come in to Old Yharnam under different circumstances and
Yeah,
befriend Djura, which is pretty cool because Djura and Eileen are two of the most interesting hunters in the game because
yeah,
you sense like they've seen and experienced stuff that you eventually do too. They've
hmm
probably been to the dream. They've maybe even gone through the cycle before. Like there's a lot of
right.
interesting. That is one area of the game where there's some room for your imagination.
Yeah, and I unfortunately I found out about that after the fact with befriending Jura. I was a little headstrong and went up to his tower and repeatedly fought him until I finally defeated him. Which, yeah, I don't know. It feels a little bit felt a little bit bad taking him down, but I was determined.
Yeah, his Ashen Hunter set is one of my
Oh,
favorites. And
it's
it's
so good.
yeah, and
It's
like
so
really
good.
good frenzy resistance too, which can be pretty clutch at certain points in the game. That's definitely one of those key sets. You can also get the Charred Hunter set, which is a little
Mhm.
hidden in Old Yharnam. I don't know if you found that one. That is one of my
I
like
don't know if I did.
top three favorites sets in Bloodborne. It's really cool.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna pull that up and check it out. Oh,
Yeah,
it
Google it
looks
real
so
quick.
good.
Yeah, it's sick,
It
but
looks
it's
so
very, very
good.
easy to miss though. Yeah, you should go back and grab it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's the top tier. The code alone is top tier.
Yeah, Old Yharnam is really cool.
Yeah, and the Bloodstarved Beast was the first fight in the game that really got my blood pumping.
Ha
The
ha
speed
ha
and
ha
like,
ha.
oh man, now I'm here with the puns. But yeah, I don't know. I think Bloodstarved Beast is a pretty good one in terms of kind of letting the player know like, hey, we've got some gas for you. Like it's a fast, high aggro enemy that's just gonna come at you. Also poison you, by the way.
Oh yeah, that poison's no joke. Did you use the pungent cocktails? Did you throw the pungies into the like against the wall and
No,
glow a little
I
bit?
did see that there's that cheese where you can just take it out, no problem. But yeah, I didn't use the pungent cocktails or whatever. Just kind of went mono and took him down. And yeah, I was literally on a sliver of my health due to poisoning at the very last strike. So it was one of those like classic boss moments where you're like down to the wire and you
Yeah.
finally get that last swing off, and it was glorious.
Yeah, I think there's even an antidote like in the back of the room, kind of hidden that you can
hmm
pick up in real time in the
hmm
fight, which is kind of
It's cool.
cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, right, really aggressive boss. A very, very, very memorable
hmm
boss. And yeah, I think Old Yharnam just overall is really cool. Like not quite as dynamic as Central Yharnam, but
Yeah.
it's not supposed to be, right? It's this part of Yharnam that was overrun and
hmm
basically just burned down by the hunters because the beasts were so out of control. And there's crucified beasts, there's just beasts everywhere. You start to realize when you get into Old Yharnam, like this city is what's the NPC's line? You feel that in Old Yharnam.
And yeah, like you said, it's definitely pretty linear, but I think it almost it has to be intentionally linear just to like to set the stage for that Jura letting it spray moment. Because I imagine if this was more like labyrinthine, players just kind of like running off into like different tangential areas and just getting repeatedly killed over and over without because when you're in that moment you're just trying to like sprint either to Jura or to the next area to not get killed. Yeah, I don't know, maybe it was intentional to kind of reel that exploration in a little bit just to keep the player's sanity intact a little bit.
Well, and lots of From games have you can think of an instance in almost all of the Soulsborne games, even Sekiro too, where it almost feels a little bit like an Armored Core level, like you're trying to navigate a battlefield and there's a turret trained on you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can think about that in like Fountainhead Palace. There's an instance of that. It's in the
Drag
Dreg
heap.
Heap, right?
Yep.
That's probably the most infamous example. It's in Shrine of Amana, like there's
Oh my
snipers
gosh.
essentially everywhere.
I
So
don't even want to talk about Shrine of Amon right now.
or I should have provided a trigger warning, but yeah, like Jura feels that way a
Flashbacks.
little bit to me, right? Like it is a sprint. It's like a death
Mm-hmm.
sprint. It's a cool space though. And then Bloodstarved also gives you your first chalice item
Oh
in the
yeah.
game, which is pretty cool. Then it's when I remember like playing it for
Marion.
the first time, and it's like, what is this? What
hmm
does this do?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I went back and I just took on that chalice. I think it's the like base Thumerian chalice, right? Yes, the Thumeru chalice, very first introductory chalice done.
Because I think it varies. Well,
Yeah,
because
just
this boss appears also in the chalices, because the
right.
chalices are really weird.
Yeah,
Um,
so the first time you fight him in Old Yharnam, he just drops the chalice straight up, the Fumeru chalice.
right. Because I think you get like Lower Hintertomb and maybe like Ailing Loran also from Bloodstar. But yeah, anyway, cool boss. You get chalice items. Where did you progress after? Because Old Yarnum's a bit of a dead end once you get down
Um,
there.
I'm trying to remember if I did. I think I went into the Forbidden Woods. I can't remember if I did that or Charnel Lane first. I feel like I took on Forbidden Woods up until Shadows, and then maybe went to Charnel Lane. I forget what the pathways look like to get to those areas off the top of my head from Cathedral Ward.
Yeah, because there's you can go to the jail. There's Hemwick Charnel Lane. Like the game does
Mhm.
open up a
Yeah,
little
it
bit at this
does.
point.
So I want to say Forbidden Woods. I think that
Yeah.
it seems about right.
Well,
Again,
and
it's
you get that item right from Amelia telling you this opens the gates to Byrgenwerth, and Byrgenwerth is at the end of the Forbidden Woods.
mm,
So,
mhm.
not that you know that at the time, but that's obviously like you're encouraged to progress that way.
Hmm.
Yeah, lots of swamps and forest areas in these games, but the Forbidden Woods is definitely pretty legendary,
Oh yeah,
especially when you don't know the layout and it's just dark snakes. It's a mess when you first
yeah,
get there.
it really is. But in the best of ways.
Oh yeah,
It's one of my favorite areas for that reason, and that you feel like you're lost in the woods, and that's kind of the the point is to just wander through this completely uninhabitable forest of just complete.
yeah.
It's just a complete mess in there,
Well,
and
and everything looks the same because I feel like in a lot
yeah.
of From games, you do use visual landmarks to guide yourself. Think about, you doing that in Central Yarnum, or maybe to a lesser extent, you'll do
Mm,
it when you get to Irithyll in Dark Souls
right.
3. And it's like as you're unlocking the shortcuts and things like that, like you start to get a sense of how the space is laid out. And in a place like the Forbidden Woods, you really can't.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of moments. Like I definitely died several times going through the Forbidden Woods just due to like thinking I could sneak past or thinking I could just run through an area and then just getting flooded with enemies because they're just you've got those like tight, narrow little passageways, and then you'll get bombarded by dogs or Molotov cocktails or what have you.
And we also talked just for a second to back up the way that you enter the Forbidden Woods, where you
Mhm.
approach the
Oh
door,
yeah.
and the
Hmm.
like the dude basically asks like, "What's the password?" And it's "Fear the Old Blood."
Hmm.
And then when the door opens and you interact, it's like already dead. It's just
It's
like
just
this
a
funny
dead
little
dude.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then you see your insight tick up in the top right corner or whatever.
yeah,
that
like
was
it's
that was a good moment. That was a very flavorful moment. It's like, oh, okay, something's going on. Like the world is something is
right,
amiss.
right. Yeah. So Forbidden Woods, was this the point in the game? Did you feel like you started struggling? Because I know in my first playthrough, this is where I
Mhm.
felt like I started dying a lot.
Oh yeah, I first time I walked into Shadows of Yharnam, which I think I streamed. I don't know if you caught that. It was like right at the
Oh,
end
I
of the stream
didn't.
that you were there for. I walked in, I gave it my best, but I think I only took him down to like maybe half health. Like all of them, I was like kind of chipping away. Obviously, the strat is to take one out, make the gank fight less imposing, but yeah, this was the first boss fight that kind of like I didn't get stuck on. It took me, maybe a handful of tries, but yeah, the difficulty starts to ramp up here for sure.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, when you're speedrunning Bloodborne, I think Shadows might be the scariest boss.
Hmm.
Because when
That
you
makes
get into the
sense.
later game, if you're doing all bosses like Lawrence and Koss and stuff are pretty sweaty, you still have to respect Gascoigne right off the bat. But Shadows of Yharnam can just kill you, like, can just kill any
Oh yeah.
player. Like,
Well, yeah,
it
because
can
you're
get out
dealing
of hand really quickly.
with all good gank fights, you're dealing with three AI instead of just one boss AI. Yeah, they can. There were certain patterns where it was like, okay, they set me up. Like I was supposed to die there. Like there was no way of getting out of that. Definitely, yeah, definitely a sweaty fight for sure.
Right, and they're like using, you can do it later with the whistle hunter tool yourself, where
Mm,
you can summon the snakes, but like they essentially start doing that to you if you don't kill them quick enough, where the giant snakes start coming out of the ground. And it's just, yeah, that fight can get so intense. They're breathing
mm.
fire, they're just They're quick. They have swords. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's ganky, but it's also well done because it's
Yeah,
hard.
no, it's my favorite gank fight
Yeah.
of all FromSoft gank fights because it's very like theatrical. I mean, it's like three dark hooded figures with a one has a katana, one's throwing fireballs at you. It's just like,
Yep.
and you're in this like weird graveyard area. It's just like, it's just cool. It's just such like a yeah cinematic fight, even though you're getting ganked. Like, and you can use those like big tombstones or the big rocks to your advantage to kind of split the aggro and yeah, well, easily my favorite gank fight, just because there's enough depth there to make it a fight that you're looking forward to, unlike a lot of the other gank fights that we've seen.
You get through Shadows, and then you're on to Byrgenwerth, which
Mm,
it's one of the only parts of Bloodborne that still kind of disappoints me a little bit because
yeah.
like there's a little bit of buildup for Byrgenwerth if you're paying attention throughout the game up until this point. And then of
Mhm.
course after the fact you realize everything kind of goes back to Byrgenwerth. Like Byrgenwerth is like I was talking about earlier, like they found the blood, they found the chalices, that spawned the healing church and just on and on and on. Like it all kind of goes back to Byrgenwerth. And when you get there, it's essentially like one little schoolhouse by a lake. There's like nothing to it.
Right.
And like the lecture hall, like as you progress, like that's clearly meant to be part of Byrgenwerth, but maybe they justify it and like the world is sort of coming apart at the seams and you're sort of
Yeah.
experiencing that part of Byrgenwerth in a different
Which
way.
is cool that like I
Yeah.
like that conceptually that the study halls got are in like another dimension or whatever. But yeah, and we've talked about this a little bit before that yeah, we wish that Byrgenwerth had been kind of built out
It's like a
a bit
grand
more.
archives or something,
Like
right? Once you
yeah,
go through the
I'm
Forbidden Woods.
imagining how Castle Cainhurst is like
Yeah.
that scale, but for Byrgenwerth, like rather than it being a castle setting, it being this giant like old scholarly, just a big old school. Like I think would be just super cool, a big old university.
Right.
So
Well,
yeah,
and
that's
there's
one
like
of
four shortcuts too. I always thought that was kind
mm.
of funny. There's a bunch of
Yeah, I know,
shortcuts.
and
It's just this little
a couple of them
area.
are completely pointless. Like there was
Right.
definitely some plans there that just didn't something didn't happen at Byrgenwerth in the along the design process, the production
Right.
process rather.
But I mean, it's still, like it's pretty interesting. Willem is there. Like you can meet Willem.
Yeah,
Did you talk? What'd you do with Willem?
yeah.
Did you kill
I just
him?
hung out. No, I hung out
Okay.
with him for a bit. I just took a moment, took a deep breath, knowing that I was gonna have to fight possibly the worst boss in the game, and just hung out there for a little bit.
Yeah, he points to the lake for you. He's just kind of like,
It was
meh,
like go fight a spider thing.
I feel like Willem is the textbook definition of that old adage about how like not making a decision is a decision, like if someone's torn between two
Hmm.
options and like they just get into analysis paralysis, like that's Willem. I mean, you
Yeah.
see what happens to Lawrence through the DLC, but it's like, look at
Hmm.
Willem. I mean, like what's the deal, man? You gotta like get off the rocking chair at some point. So there's also a really tough NPC encounter.
Oh yeah, yeah. In the
Oh, Yurie. The name was escaping me. It's
yeah,
like Yurie. She's like a member of the choir, which is like the highest echelon of the healing church.
yeah,
That's
that
a
was
pretty
rough.
tough fight when you don't know that it's coming.
Yeah, and especially with the I don't know this. I just remember getting caught on the staircase and being in that second level and just like getting caught in corners and it's just yeah, that's a rough one, but a fun one. That's a good NPC fight.
Totally. Yeah. So then you plunge down through the lake and encounter
Hmm.
Rom, which Rom's really interesting because Rom
Yeah.
was one of the scholars as well. And in her attempts to commune with the Great Ones, transformed into Rom the vacuous spider, which is just almost like more of a caterpillar than
Hmm.
a spider. But yeah, it's like
Hmm.
this was a real person though at one point
Yeah,
who
kind of
became
wild.
this. Um,
Yeah, and I jokingly say worst boss in the game. I think mechanically it's probably my one of my least favorite. It's obviously a super cool boss stage, like the endless water. You've
yeah.
got that Queen Renala vibes going.
Well, and isn't it
Um,
interesting how Rom does not aggro you the first time you go down there? Rom just
yeah.
chills. Look at this fat, cute, grotesque caterpillar spider thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can, I mean, walk right up and you eventually just have to engage. I mean, you get it
Mm-hmm.
sort of a free cheap shot to start the fight. But that's another one like in different from Yharnam, Shadows of Yharnam. that fight can get out of hand pretty quickly. Like
Right.
there's tried and true strategies for it where like you can punish Rom enough that she can't even teleport away.
Oh,
Which
really?
is oh
Interesting.
yeah, you can actually stop that teleporting, which is pretty cool.
Huh.
But again, you make one or two mistakes, you're surrounded by the ads and you're dead.
Yeah.
The run up is pretty forgiving though, right? Because
Oh,
of all the
yeah. You,
shortcuts and where the lantern is. Like you
yeah.
die to Rom, it's not a big deal.
Yeah. All of the super necessary shortcuts in Byrgenwerth.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like Rom's.
I mean, she and Gascoigne, right? We can get that out of the way. She and
Yeah,
Gascoigne, but
yeah, no,
you know,
she's got a cool design. Like I like the big spider mom vibe, I guess. Spider on a lake is an interesting image, to say the least. But yeah, just not particularly fond of running from teleport to teleport, dealing with the ads, and but cool design, cool arena.
and then you defeat Rom,
Hmm.
and you actually see Queen Yharnam, Thumerian Queen, who the city name comes from. In the shadows, we might have actually been texting about that when you were playing through, but I always read it as like the shadows are Thumerian as well, like the shadows
Mm,
of Yharnam. It felt to me like they were probably like the queen's protectors, like
interesting.
sort of her bodyguards or something like that. I mean, I think you can interpret it a couple different ways, but like how tall they are and stuff, it feels like it's not a coincidence that that battle precedes you fighting Rom and seeing Queen Yharnam for the first time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd never thought of it that way. But yeah, it makes sense that they're kind of her first line of defense in that regard.
Yeah, then the Blood Moon rolls in,
Hmm.
and yeah, the game picks up quite a bit.
Yeah, I forget after the Blood Moon. Obviously, it switches, changes a lot of things in, most notably the Cathedral Ward. But I'm trying to remember where I went to next.
Yeah, you get teleported because did you have the jailer kidnap you?
I did to go to Yahar'gul
Because
jail.
I do think I remember catching one of those streams of
Hmm.
yours, right, where you were in Yahar'gul
Mm.
early. So you had already
Hmm.
been there.
Yes. So I don't remember if I had done, because you get teleported there and you take on Paarl, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. So that was probably what I did next.
because you
Was
can
the one that.
actually defeat Paarl early and go into Old Yarnum the back way
That's right.
and
That's
get
right.
to
So
Djura. Yeah.
I may have even taken on Paarl before Rom. I don't remember the sequence of events there, but yeah, definitely did the jailer who scoops you up and throws you into Yahar'gul.
After you defeat Rom and you get the cutscene with Queen Yarnam and the Blood Moon setting in, you get transported to the unseen village.
Oh
Now,
yes,
this is
that's
where the game starts getting weird.
yeah. Taking it back to the first time I went to Yahar'gul. Yeah, you're thrown into this jail cell and you hear like crying. Someone's like a woman's crying in the distance, and you find this. I think she's like a member of the clergy or something like that, and she's like crying in this corner. And I didn't figure out until later that you needed to be wearing like church gear for her to like talk to you. So I kind of missed her quest line entirely, but it was just super unsettling getting teleported to this like really eerie area and just hearing someone crying in the distance. And then you go outside and there's like this really haunting song in the background. You don't hear a lot of background tracks for areas in From games, and you hear this like really eerie, ethereal choir kind of singing in the distance, and it's
Yeah.
just like this dark looming. I don't know. The whole area of Yahar'gul is just super unsettling. It's one of the more unsettling areas that you experience in the game, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure. Yahar'gul is weird because it's like sort of adjacent to the main part of Yarnum and like Cathedral Ward and everything. And it's where these Mensis scholars reside who are trying to commune with the Great Ones. And there's kind of this interesting connection with Elden Ring. Like, there's a lot of playing around in Elden Ring with this idea of like someone's physical body dying, but their spirit living on, or like their spirit dying, but the physical body living on, right? Like with Ronnie and
Mm.
in Godwin. And there's a little bit of that in Yahar'gul. Once you get through this part of town, you defeat one Reborn, and then before you get bounced to the lecture hall, you walk into that room full of the Mensis scholar corpses, and in the chair at the front of all of them is Micolash's corpse, and that's what
Mhm.
teleports you to the lecture hall. But I always thought that was an interesting idea. Like they're trying to commune. Like Micolash is like basically trying to do what Lawrence did all over again, which is like probably not a great idea. And yeah, they like sort of sacrificed the physical body, and now they're in like this nightmare realm, and it's like this is where the game again starts to get pretty creepy. And one
Mhm.
reborn is another one of those bosses that'll just catch you. Like you make a mistake, one reborn will kill you.
Yep. Yeah, and it's got that you walk into the boss room and you immediately see all the clerics or whatever in the tower. It gives off that big tower knight energy
Oh
from
yeah.
Demon Souls.
Yeah, the women with the bells are basically like the
Yeah.
archers during the Tower Knight fight,
Yeah.
100%. Yep.
You make the beeline for the stairs, go up there, take them all out.
Or if you're an elite hardcore gamer, you don't do that.
No, but you do. And well, I did.
Did that boss give you trouble, or were you able to get it in a couple tries?
I got it in a couple tries, but I can definitely see how that can really frustrate someone because it hits hard, especially because you have to be like right up on it and you need to attack the very small like kind of primary form, the primary body, get the most damage. Yeah, if you're staying close, it can really pack a punch. But it falls into that category where you can just kind of stay to the side of it or stay to like kind of like the back corner of it. You'll be able to avoid the majority of its attacks. So once I was able to kind of figure out a solid positioning strategy, I was able to take it down in just a couple tries. But yeah, what a terrifying looking boss though.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I feel like as long as I mean, it's a very like RNG dependent boss too. It does
Mm-hmm.
depend on kind of the mathematical roll of the dice, right? Like what you
Yeah.
get when one reborn starts puking like the corpses and stuff
Oh
on you.
God,
Like
yeah.
that can get you. But right,
That'll
you
get
can
you.
be smart, take it down, walk in, give Micolash's corpse a little pat pat, and boom,
Hmm.
you're in the lecture hall.
Yeah, one of my favorite areas in the game, and it's just such like a. It could have been part of Byrgenwerth 100%, but it is almost. It is cool that it's just kind of this off little
Yeah.
otherworldly dimension where you can go hang out with spider patches and like
Yeah.
enter weird lecture halls filled with like these like gooey gooey students. Like I don't know,
Yeah.
it's almost
Because
as
it
like
is
the
Byrgenwerth, right? Like I feel like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's the genuine Byrgenwerth experience
Hmm.
that you actually get in the game.
And as like bizarre and creepy as it is, it's almost like it's like almost comic relief in a sense that it's just like there's just so much weird stuff going on there and it's just
Yeah.
such an aside from everything else you've been experiencing that it's just like I don't know. I had fun hanging out in the lecture building for a
Well,
little
and I
while.
think the level design, it's simple, but it's not simplistic, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
good. It actually reminds me a lot of not quite as vast, obviously, but a little bit like the Prison of Hope layout in Demon Souls, where you're
Oh yeah.
in these
Mm-hmm.
like rectangular grids, right? Going from like room to room, trying to get the key, trying to get in. I feel like the two levels of the lecture hall are, it almost to me feels like a little bit of a
Mm-hmm.
throwback to Prison of Hope. And yeah, right. You find Spider Patches who is like deranged and like worshiping. I mean, it's interesting because so there's a lot of these amygdala. Like there's not just like there's the one you fight, but there's many more than that.
Hmm. He's a
And
big
he
fan.
seems to think that he's like worshiping
Yeah.
like that amygdala, or he thinks like the amygdala is his god or something. Yeah,
Hmm.
he's just a nut. I also just want to call out to this idea, like now that we're getting into like the Mensis Micolash stuff and
Hmm.
Byrgenwerth a little bit more. I love this idea that too much insight causes frenzy. Like if you were to have, you would turn into Rom essentially, and that insight in the world of Bloodborne means like eyes on the inside, which is an
Hmm.
interesting way to like think about enlightenment. And then, like
Huh.
encountering Rom, and Rom has all those eyes, and you see what
Right.
happened to her. So to me, that actually feels, when people think Lovecraft, they think of, tentacles and squids and things like that. And it's like, yeah, that's part of it, but I don't feel like it's nearly as an important part of the Lovecraft themes as like the fear of scientific discovery is. I
Mm.
feel like that's one of Lovecraft's biggest ideas is that big scientific discoveries like within a group or a civilization or something can be terribly dangerous. and there's a fear associated with them. I mean, you could almost think about it as like the Manhattan Project, right? Like developing the nuclear bomb or something. I'm sure he had his influences at the time as to where, some of those ideas were coming from. But in Bloodborne, it really is like the blood trying to commune with the great ones. It's a little bit like this forbidden fruit stuff, like a little bit of the Pandora's
Mm,
box, like be
mm,
careful what you wish for. So when you actually encounter Micolash and he's running around and he's calling out to Koss and saying, give us eyes and all of that. I mean, that's because he's mad, but that's what he's getting at. Like he's
right.
trying to transcend. He's already transcended his physical body, and now he's trying to transcend further. So it's kind of
He's in
interesting
too
to like
deep.
look at, well, you like look at him, right? And then
Yeah.
you look at Lawrence, and then you look at Willem, like all these Byrgenwerth figures, and it's like it didn't really work out for anybody, did it?
No, it really didn't. No. Yeah, they reach a point like Micolash is like right on the cusp of, well, he's entered that phase of being so completely consumed by that idea and that goal of kind of this of ascending and yeah, finding that next level of enlightenment. So that's the one thing I appreciate about the moment that you share with Micolash during his boss fight is you see individual who's so totally consumed by that goal, that search, and it's just, I don't know, it's fascinating. It's just so fascinating.
I always thought the way he delivered, I guess, we jumped a little bit. We can certainly talk about the level that precedes the Micolash battle that comes after the lecture hall. But even the way the voice actor, who does obviously such a good job because it's such a memorable character, he delivers that line where he's like, as you once did for the vacuous Rom. Like he almost sounds kind
Mm,
of jealous or resentful or something. Like
mm,
he wants to transcend. He's just, yeah, he's so far gone, but it's a cool moment. And if you're paying attention, you start to sense like how these pieces fit together and what kind of cultish weirdness is actually going on here.
mm.
But yeah, what about the actual nightmare of Mensis and like Mergo's loft and stuff? Like give me some thoughts on that area.
I
Because you start getting frenzied right away if you step out
right.
into the
I
open.
and again we're gonna kind of jump back again through my analysis of, or my, I guess, my how I kind of rate this area compared to other areas is obviously Nightmare of Mensis. You also kind of draw back to the Nightmare Frontier, which is kind of like your first introduction to this like nightmare realm, which I wasn't a huge fan of Nightmare Frontier. It's that kind of classic Miyazaki and Poison Swamp area that you just kind of, I don't know, this barren wasteland. You kind of just gotta get through it to get to Amygdala. But the Nightmare of Mensis, on the other hand, kind of like hones the atmosphere of the frontier and like also allows you these like big elaborate classic FromSoft dungeons to explore as well. So yeah, I don't know. I really like the Nightmare of Mensis. I think it's the best example of this like weird nightmare chaos realm presented in Bloodborne.
Yeah, yeah, very memorable. It's certainly like a jump in terms of the game's challenge
Hmm.
at that point. There's a lot being thrown at you. I would again go back to like Armored Core. I even think the run up, to that first door, that whole area between the first lantern and then that first door you open in the room where all the spiders drop on you. That feels like a mech battlefield, right? Like you're trying to navigate. There's
Yep,
turrets on you. There's like a status effect AoE stuff going on. I mean, you have those
frenzy.
giants throwing the stones at you. It's just a mess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty mad running through there. Literally mad. You're going mad
Oh
as
yeah.
you're running through there. So yeah, I thought
Which I
that
love
run up.
stuff like that, right? I love when From
Yeah,
does
totally.
that, where there's like a status effect happening to you,
Hmm.
but there's real meaning behind it. It's not just happening to, create some kind of difficulty spike in the level. Like there's like a real story reason why that's happening in that location. I always think that's cool.
Hmm. Then obviously you fight Micolash, and then eventually Murgo's wet nurse there too. Memorable fights, maybe not. Maybe not. Neither of them are one of the more difficult fights in the game, but they're definitely two of the most memorable.
Yeah, and in Micolash, like at some point, man, I know we talked about this. You'll have to do a full-on arcane playthrough because it's so much like stupid fun. And
Yeah.
the two spells that Micolash uses against you, the Augur of
Hmm.
Ebrietas, which is the noodle arm, and then a
Yep.
Call Beyond, which is the homing spell. when
Oh
you
yeah,
have a
that would
lot
be
of
cool.
arcane and you're rocking Moonlight Greatsword or you're rocking the Cause Parasite and you have the Milkweed Rune and all this stuff, and then you're breaking out those two tools, it's just so much fun. Like it's a
Oh, I'm sure.
completely different way to experience Bloodborne. Like you
Hmm.
move differently, you engage mobs differently, you fight bosses differently. So yeah, you'll definitely have to do that at some point, just like pure arcane run.
Yeah, 100%.
So yeah, Micolash definitely, he can be tricky. Like it's a deceiving boss. I've never minded it. I know some players hate chasing him around, but I always thought it was cool. It's memorable. Yeah, it's not like the best boss in the game. It's a bit of a gimmick, but it's always interesting in these games for the most part when you're pitted against another like two-legged humanoid, boss AI versus just some big monster or something. And like I mentioned earlier, that's kind of all what Sekiro is for the most part. For Sekiro,
Right.
you're fighting other humans with swords for the most part, but obviously Micolash is important to the story, and he's talking to you the whole time. And I feel like a lot of those bosses end up kind of being like fan favorites. I think about
Hmm.
Osiris and Dark Souls 3. I mean, fans always
Yep.
like
One of my
bosses who
favorites.
talk to you. Like it adds something to it. So
Does.
yeah, and then you play the game with the elevators, which I always kind of like, and then you get up Murgo's wet nurse.
Hmm.
What like, and again, no right or wrong answer because the game actually does not. I really don't think there's any source material in the game that spells it out. What do you think that boss is? Like, do you think that boss is real or is it like a fan? Like, what do you make of that fight?
It's I don't know. It's hard to say, and that's mostly because again this is my first playthrough. I'm not like super well versed with the lore, but I think you get an umbilical cord from her, correct? So I think she's very clearly tied to those extraterrestrial greater beings in some fashion. So I'm not entirely certain how she's tied in to like Queen Yharnam and all of that. That there's clearly a very obvious connection between her and Queen Yharnam.
I'm actually blanking on because I haven't read it in years, but Redgrave, who we were talking about earlier, who wrote the
Mm,
Pale Blood Hunt very shortly after the game came out, kind of the first one of the first community members to really deeply dive into the lore of one of these games. And at the time, Bloodborne certainly seemed to be the most complicated of the From games, the Miyazaki games at least. I can't remember what he sort of posited with the wet nurse, if anything, but I do remember because I've heard kind of what you were getting at is like there's some affiliation with like a great one because Mergo might is like maybe like an infant great one. I mean, it's a little this is a part of the game that's a little ambiguous. I remember hearing
mm.
Sophie of Sinclair Lore. She posited that Mergo's wet nurse might actually be like Mergo attempting to defend themselves, which
Oh,
I thought was
interesting.
that's kind of which again, I don't know, that could be right, it could be wrong, it maybe doesn't matter either way. It's kind of whatever you think, but I thought that was an interesting idea. Yeah, I've never known what to make of this fight either. You're right. It drops one third of the umbilical cord, which is interesting. And then there's the delay. Did you notice the delay when you defeat the boss and then the baby crying and then the
Yeah,
message you get?
yeah,
Did you notice that's a little strange? It's a little
yeah.
unusual.
It's definitely intentional, and I'm not. I don't know what it means, but it certainly means something.
It's Nightmare Slain,
Yeah,
right? Instead of why am I blanking
slaughtered.
on that? Yeah, Prey Slaughtered, right? Instead it's Nightmare Slain. It kind of feels like that it means like it has implications for the whole dream realm and maybe that you have slain a great one or spawn of a great one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very interesting moment. I remember the first time I played Bloodborne though, when I realized because there's a lot of optional areas and we can hit on a couple of those, but
Hmm.
you can essentially just go back to the hunter's dream at this point, walk up to Gehrman, have him cut off your head, and the game's over.
Right.
And I remember when the game first came out, I was kind of like, wow, that's it. Like, it's really short. That's sort of coming off of Dark Souls, where I think you and I might have talked about this before. I feel like the second half of Dark Souls, kind of after ONS, overstates its welcome a bit.
Mm.
Like it just drags on like the Golden Gates and all that. Like it drags on a little too long. Like all the whole Izalith area probably could have been cut. Duke's Archives is cool, but yeah, that part of the game drags a little bit. And then like conversely, Bloodborne feels like a lot tighter. Like it wraps up a lot more quickly, which is interesting. But again, if
Hmm.
you add in all the optional areas, if you go to Charnel Lane, if you go to Cainhurst, if you go to the Nightmare Frontier, you experiment with different weapons and you follow through other NPC quests and you fight like the Bloody Crow of Cainhurst and stuff.
Hmm.
The game has a lot more breadth to it, but it is
Yeah.
interesting. Like if you're speed running Bloodborne, if you're just doing the base game or you're just trying to move through quickly, you defeat Mergo's wet nurse, you go back to the nightmare, or rather the Hunter's Dream, and the game's over. It's interesting because when I was playing, I had no sense of how far I was at this point.
Right. Yeah.
Did you feel that way?
Yeah. Well, because I knew that you can elect to obviously fight Gehrman, and depending on how many umbilical cords you have, take on the one Reborn. But I had reached this point after having done some of the optional stuff. Like I very intentionally, like I'm pretty sure I fought Micolash and then went and I definitely did some of the side stuff to where by the time I fought the wet nurse, it felt like I was in the late game. And I think from there, I then went into the DLC or something like that. Which, yeah, that's a whole other story that adds so much more to the game. Yeah, it's really fascinating that you can cut your time so much shorter by just going from Mergos to credits, basically.
I had to look it up real quick. Redgrave, his theory was that the wet nurse is kin of the cosmos, not like a full great one.
Mm,
But
interesting.
but
Hmm.
yeah, right. At this point, you can end the game. I would say let's backtrack a little bit. Did you
Hmm.
find the shortcut through the Forbidden Woods to Iosefka's clinic
I did. Yep.
with the crate with the longest ladder in Soulsborne history?
Yeah, it really is.
Can you
Um,
imagine that when you were
mhm.
deep in those woods, you'd get back to the tutorial area? It just that blew my mind.
Yep. Yep. Ties it all together. It's one of
Yeah.
those, classic OG Firelink moments.
Yep. Because
But
you
yeah.
can, that's how you get the Cainhurst summons. It's
Yep.
actually in Iosefka's clinic. So it's interesting to think when you start the game, in that sick room, beyond those sealed doors that you can't access at the time, there's some weird stuff.
Yeah. Because yeah, I totally forgot Cainhurst is like completely optional. Like you can just
Oh, yeah.
you could just never touch Cainhurst, which I'm sure many people did on their first playthrough.
I did not find it on my first playthrough. And because you have to defeat the witches of Hemwick and then
Hmm.
also have the summons, and then, you stand on that road by the broken bridge in the
Yeah, it's like such a specific set of
I know.
things.
Classic, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, a carriage pulls up and you go on a ride.
Hmm.
And I know, yeah, let's talk about that because I feel like we might as well knock out a couple of these optional areas. I know you
Yeah.
mentioned not a huge fan of the Nightmare Frontier, basically Poison Swamp. I kind of dig it, but I also totally know what you mean.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Cainhurst though.
Hmm.
It sounds like this might have been your favorite part of the game.
Yeah. 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 100%. I
Yeah,
mean,
you're not alone in that feeling either. I think a
mhm.
lot of people feel that way.
Just yeah, the moment stepping onto the carriage and stepping off it into this, kind of snowy, isolated castle. It's just such a cool setting, and it gives off like once you enter the castle itself, it gives off big grand archives vibes from Dark Souls 3, which is one of my favorite levels, just because it's got that elevation that I absolutely love in FromSoft levels.
Well, it feels
Um,
real soulsy, right? I think that's why it's
yeah.
so much
Yep.
fun because like it's the Bloodborne vibe and the Bloodborne combat, but with a dungeon that feels like it could be in a Dark Souls game.
Absolutely, that's absolutely the case. So yeah, once I opened the doors and found Grand Archives and Bloodborne, I was I was good. I was set for a while.
Right. Well, and it's snowy, and it's even called Forsaken Castle Cainhurst.
Hmm.
So it's just immediately you're intrigued. You're like, okay, this is different. People aren't hanging out around here. Like,
Hmm.
and yeah, you learn that like Cainhurst was essentially home to vampires, these Vilebloods,
The
who
Vilebloods.
were executed by Logarius and his executioners. And I believe that Logarius is a Thumerian based on the way he looks and his size. And that's just, it's like this really cool side story that's going on in Bloodborne, this whole thing with the executioners and the Vile Bloods. And yeah, I mean, the Cainhurst is challenging. It's ganky. You can get some really cool gear there. I don't know, like what else would you say about Cainhurst, or do you just want to talk about Logarius?
Well, obviously Logarius. We're definitely going to get into it with Logarius, but yeah, I love the vibe. I like that this is, if you do Alfred's quest line, this is kind of like the climax of that story, and oh my gosh, is it like, the confrontation with Annalise, the Queen of the Vilebloods, and there's just a lot that goes down in Cainhurst that just really added to my enjoyment of the game and just enjoyment of the story, I think.
Oh, 100%. Alfred, when you talk to him and he even says something like, the eminent master Logarius and stuff, it's like, okay, this guy's got some weird allegiances. What's going on here? And yeah, keep going about your experience with Cainhurst.
Yeah, it's got that, I love the painted worlds. You got Ariamis and Ariandel. And this is basically just feels like the Ariamis of
Oh, yeah.
Bloodborne, where it's
Great call. Even the snow. Yeah.
Yep, the snow, and also you need it's like this offshoot area that you can miss pretty easily. It was just one of those special moments for me in this game that it really kind of encapsulated that wonderment that we as FromSoft fans look for when we're experiencing these games.
Right.
Journey through this castle, you make your way to the top, and crossing these like snow-covered rooftops of a castle was cool in and of itself, and you end up in this boss room, which is just the roof of Castle Cainhurst.
Doesn't that remind you, Leland, that they always wanted to do like Elden Ring Legacy Dungeon stuff? Like you're always on the roofs in these games, always.
Yeah.
Like they always wanted
Right.
to do Stormvale, right? So you're kind of getting like the precursor to that a little bit with levels like
100%.
Cainhurst. Yeah.
Then yeah, you stumble upon good old Martyr Logarius. He's just chilling.
The Eminent, according to Alfred.
Yeah, he's just big chilling on his chair. Sees you walk in, and he's like, "All right, let's do this thing."
It's a great climb. Again, a climb to the top. And
Yeah,
yeah,
the run up isn't the best.
no, I mean like Cainhurst is really cool like the first couple times you experience it, and then like when you're just trying to get back to Logarius, it's like, oh god, okay,
Like, oh,
let's do this. But
up the ladders we go.
yeah, but no, it's an awesome fight, and it sounded like when you were playing, he might have actually been your number one boss in the game.
Yeah, he 100% is top tier, S tier fight for me. Logarius is number one in my heart. I just found that he was like the perfect balance of, like you were mentioning before, there's a lot of the humanoid fights where you're fighting someone who's kind of on your level, but because Logarius is a Thumerian, he's got this height to him, which kind of puts him at like a different, not quite on your plane, but he's still moving at your speed. He has moves where he's swinging his scythe, etc. And then he's got his magic, the sorceries that he's casting. To me, this just felt like one of the more balanced fights in the game, where you really engage and you learn the dance. I know I use that analogy a lot when it comes to the bosses that I really enjoy and really love is, learning the dance of Gundyr, learning the dance of Godric. All of my favorite bosses are engaging in that. Each move that they have it stacks well with all their other moves, and in learning that move set and learning their total move set, it becomes this complex dance where you move from one place into the next based upon what they're doing, what their move is next, whether they're Logarius is super aggro right now. He's in your face doing a lot of melee stuff. You're gonna react a little bit differently, and then he'll back up a little bit. He'll jump across the arena and then start casting his sorceries again. So you kind of go in and out of these different lulls of tempo, and your brain's just kind of working through all these different move sets all at once, and it's just so engaging and just so much fun that I can't help but absolutely adore this boss fight.
Yeah, I'm right with you. My favorite part of the fight, like you said, your brain's going in a lot of different directions when you're fighting Logarius, is when he plants the sword and then it becomes sort of like a turret and you have to deal with it before you can get back to him. And meanwhile, he might be airborne, he's teeing up to hit you. So there's just enough going on that you start to feel stressed and overwhelmed, which I think that tension is what makes for such a good boss fight. And I think the fact that, like we were talking about the other sort of humanoid or semi-humanoid bosses, like Micolash and Gascoigne more, even though Gascoigne and Micolash are both sort of lost causes in their own way, like they're sort of pretty far gone, they still look pretty normal. They still look pretty human. And Logarius is like a corpse. He's like a mummy. He's like, he just sounds intimidating. He looks intimidating. He's a little bigger than you, but he's a parry boss, and it's another great teaching moment where he's a little trickier to parry than like maybe Gascoigne, but he's not too tricky. But unlike Maria, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I feel like those parry windows, it doesn't feel like they come quite as frequently. Like the fights may be a little more dynamic, you know?
Hmm. But once you can get him in those certain attack pattern loops, it just becomes so satisfying to start hitting those parries pretty consistently. But I think his AI is like it's robust enough to, if you're staying in his face for too long, he'll then do that quick teleport thing where he bounces back and he kind of resets. So you can absolutely run into certain instances with Logarius's AI where you can walk into that boss fight and probably just parry, 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 parry. You're done. Move on to the next thing. But I think his AI is like it's just complex enough, and his moveset is just catered enough on the back end towards wanting to cast sorceries that you can also have another totally different fight where he tries to keep his distance. So it's got that dynamic level to it where it just keeps you on your toes.
And then when you beat him, and it's one of those funny moments. It's kind of like the bowl when you defeat the dancer in DS3, where like you defeat a boss, you get an item, and then you use the item immediately, and it's pretty goofy. Whereas like you get that crown like
Put
right
on
away,
you gotta
and then
put
you
on a
use
little
it.
crown.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny, but yeah, it reveals what was previously invisible, and it's Annalise's chamber at the top of Cainhurst, and yeah, there's the Covenant, and yeah, it's pretty cool. And you start to realize, like, oh, okay, this is what's going on. Like Logarius, what was left of Logarius, he was still trying to suppress this, these Vilebloods at Cainhurst. The Healing Church believed were like defiling all the practices around blood and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, and I remember that's when I started to like think, because From Soft loves their naming conventions, is like Arianna Annalise, like this kind of sounds similar. And I've even heard people speculate that one room in Cainhurst, you probably will remember it. It's the one with the dining table, and all the portraits on the
Oh, yeah.
walls. Some people have speculated that one of the portraits looks like Arianna.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Which, like, it might as well be, like, even if it wasn't intended to be, I think it might as well be. Like, that's kind of a cool fill in the blank moment. But yeah, Cainhurst rolls. I think I'd even heard rumors that, like, there was supposed to be even more to Cainhurst. Like, there was even cut sections of Cainhurst. And maybe to your point, it was one of those situations where they didn't entirely know what to do with it or how to place it in the game world or something. So it's a little disconnected. But I love that call out that it really does feel like Ariamis or Ariandel or something, even aesthetically.
Yeah, yeah, man. What I would do for just a little bit more Cainhurst, yeah, would absolutely have loved that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Nightmare Frontier, which is also accessed from the lecture hall optional area. I don't hate it, but yeah, it's not my favorite area in the game either. But I love Amygdala. Amygdala
Yeah.
is one of my favorite bosses in Bloodborne. It's a really cool fight. It's obviously, I would say at this point within the world of FromSoft, it's like an iconic design.
Yep.
Did you do that in your playthrough?
Yeah, I took on amygdala, and yeah, it took me out a couple times. That's for sure. It's got some with those like jump attacks and the AOE's it can pull off if you stay under it for too long. It definitely, again, it can get you, but so it's not quite on the level of the other classification where you can just kind of get behind it and go to town. It's a little bit more complex than that, and I really enjoyed this fight.
Yeah, any boss that rips off its arms and tries to kill you with them is is pretty legit.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Did you
Yeah,
say that you fought Paarl on your playthrough?
I did. Not I don't know. Not the biggest fan of the Paarl fight. It's a bit of a camera nightmare. He's kind of all over.
Yeah.
Super cool design. I mean, this giant electric beast. The first time you see Paarl is an absolute spectacle, and he can absolutely mess you up. Because I took him on pretty early in my playthrough. I was probably a little bit under leveled, but yeah, he's just all over that arena, and it's hard to kind of keep your camera on him. And it's another
Yeah.
one of those beast fights where you just kind of gotta stay underneath them, look for the AOE cues. But it's he's a great example of a boss that is high aggro, can keep it moving, and yeah, definitely can put on the pressure.
Yeah, I think I share your feelings almost completely about Paarl. Like, really cool silhouette. Yeah, this idea of an electrified beast, it's so cool. Intimidation factor right away, the way he kind of
Hmm.
wakes up, stands up, comes to life. The Paarl fight is like a good opportunity to call out Bloodborne's limb breaking system. Like we just talked about amygdala, which this applies to as well. But this idea that some of these really big, chunky beast bosses, or even in amygdala's case, not a beast, but like a great one, you can break their limbs and get this
Hmm.
huge stagger on them. And I just think that's a really cool little mechanic that's never really explained to you or taught to you. Most players, I think, for the first time just sort of stumble on it and they're like, whoa, what did I just do? But Paarl's a great case. Paarl to me almost feels like slightly more advanced Sith and Royal Rat Authority, kind of like a
Yeah.
dog. Like you got to kind of
Hmm.
get under the belly. And in this case, instead of just chunking away at the belly hitbox, I'm usually going for the legs and trying to get
Yep.
that break. So yeah, not a bad fight, but I'm with you. Not definitely not one of my favorites, but does open up that huge gate, which I remember. I don't know, my first couple playthroughs, I was so confused about how you opened that gate when you were on the old Yharnam side. It's like, what's behind this? And then I was like,
Yeah.
oh, Paarl's behind this. Okay. But what about Upper Cathedral Ward? This was another
Yep.
area that
Hmm.
I did not discover for quite a few cycles. I want to say I actually ended up seeing an image online of Ebrietas, and I was like, "What is this?" And I asked somebody, or I researched it or something. But yeah, it was an area on like my first two or three playthroughs I just don't think I found.
Yeah, and I think it's you get the it's such a weird sequence that you have to kill a specific enemy. It's like one of the brain suckers to drop the orphanage key, and then you also need the upper cathedral key, which you get. Um,
Yahar'gul.
yeah, Yahar'gul. So it's like you need two separate keys, and one of which just drops off of an enemy that you can just completely miss. But yeah, and then that takes you to the Celestial Emissary and Ebrietas,
I do
both
think it's
of
pretty cool
which,
though when you get up there and you realize you're above the Amelia boss arena.
yeah.
And it's again in one of
Hmm.
those moments, kind of like when you hit Iosefka's clinic from the Forbidden Woods, where it's like, oh, this is really cool. Like it makes you think of DS1, the world being,
Hmm.
super super connected. I would say Celestial Emissary. I love all the kin enemies in the game. Like I think they're so cool, but that's probably the weakest boss in the game.
Yeah, 100%. It's just
Like the
it's a,
witches is an more interesting puzzle, I would
yeah,
say.
which
Yeah.
we didn't talk about. We can touch on them real quickly here. Witches is like a cool. They're probably like the coolest gimmick fight. Obviously, we talked about Micolash being a gimmick fight. I do like the witches. Obviously, an easy boss, but like a fun little puzzle to
Mhm.
kind of solve. It's more of a puzzle fight.
Because you get exhausted. We've talked about this. So you would get exhausted if every fight was just Gascoigne or like a
Yeah.
Gascoigne clone or something.
Yep.
So yeah, I think we're both fans when From mixes it up. Sometimes they hit, sometimes they miss, but I actually think the witches get a little too much hate. Like it's fine. It's not an offensive fight at all, and the level is great. I mean, it's
Mhm.
I told you earlier, my brain is just like mashed potatoes
No.
this week.
Mine
What
too.
is the first area after Vort in Dark Souls 3? That's how gone my brain is right now.
Oh, the oh no.
Oh, come on.
Um, we can't be that
Oh my God.
tired, are we? It's one of our favorite collectively between us both.
This is embarrassing.
It's like
Undead Settlement. Jesus
Undead.
Christ. Oh my
That's
God.
where
I'm
we're
not
at.
even going to cut
We're-
that out. I'm leaving
no,
that
no,
in.
we're leaving this in for listeners. Both of us have had a long week. It's like for me, it's like 11 p.m. on a Thursday.
I put like 2,000 hours in Dark Souls 3. And
I know.
I don't know the
And
name of
and
Undead
we
Settlement.
both have sung that area's praises for so long on Dead Settlement, and I literally just ran through that. Like I
Right.
said last weekend, I was just hanging out in the Undead Settlement,
As one does, right?
as one does.
Oh my God, that's funny.
Uh,
But anyway, right? So it is the clear precursor
Yeah.
to Undead Settlement. And that was one of those really fun moments when Dark Souls 3 came out and you hit Undead Settlement. It was like, oh my God, the Bloodborne stuff carried over. But I like that level so much, Hemwick, because it reveals the really messed up ecosystem that the Healing Church has going on, where like,
Hmm.
these women at Hemwick are just dissecting bodies. And
Yeah.
I mean, again, like the city's either overrun with beasts, or people are sick, or people are being dissected or experimented on. It's like this assembly line almost. And as you travel to these different areas, you're seeing all the different parts of that assembly line, and it's really creepy. There's some good claustrophobic, tight interior areas. You do get up on a few roofs. There's,
Hmm.
some big open areas. There's lots of dogs. Yeah, it's pretty classic Bloodborne.
Yeah, there's the one you go through like this like barn or something, and the doors like swinging in the wind or something. There's like a lot of really cool little atmospheric uh, parts of that area. So yeah, I'm with you on
And then what about
trying to
we
win.
hit on Celestial Emissary, but what about Ebrietas? You hit Ebrietas as well in your playthrough?
Yeah, I I honestly I don't have a ton of uh, thoughts regarding Ebrietas. I pretty much just went down there, the old rinse and repeat. Just you literally can just get behind Ebrietas. It's a similar situation to from Dark Souls, the Seek
Yep.
the
See,
Scaleless.
even a
It's
little
pretty
bit
much
like the Dragonkin enemies from Elden Ring, where you can kind of hang on their back
yeah,
foot. Like Ebrietas has that tail, and
yep,
you got to be careful. She can still get you. It's not quite as reliable as some of the other
yeah.
bosses, but yeah,
But it's
you
still
can
that
totally hang
pocket,
out. Yeah,
the
you
pocket.
can
You
take a
literally
ride and get in some hits for sure.
yeah. So and that's kind of what I did. I she's got some cool moves. I like her arena, just kind of the dark, dank cavern. But yeah, it was a one and done.
Well, and I think what's cool, because you fight Ebrietas, because the Chalice dungeons are really weird, and I think based on my own experiences and just conversations I've had, other community members I've heard talk about this, it makes the most sense to me if time sort of bends and warps in the Chalice dungeons. Like, because
Mm,
you fight Rom in the Chalice dungeons, you fight Ebrietas, it's like, well, how is Rom down here? And it's like, well, it must be a different point in time.
right.
Um, that's the only way I think it makes sense. But I believe the backstory there is that the Healing Church found Ebrietas down in the chalices, and that she was like, because she's like a relative of the great, like she's not exactly a great one. She's right kin, like daughter of the cosmos, like she's almost there, but she was left behind, like she was kind of abandoned
Hmm.
by the great ones. And then the Healing Church sort of uses her to try to commune with higher powers. And when you find Ebrietas, she appears to be mourning over what looks like a Rom corpse, which
Hmm.
again kind of doesn't make, that is just one part of the game where I'm going to throw up my arms and be like, I don't get it.
Right.
I'm not, like, it looks
Don't know
like
the
Rom's
connection there.
corpse. Yeah, so
Interesting. Huh.
I'm sure, like, it's fun to speculate about, and I could, but I don't have any strong ideas about what that really means. I guess whatever you want it to mean, it can mean. But I actually like this fight. I like the Ebrietas
Hmm.
design, and I actually love the music. This is one of my favorite pieces of music from the game. It's really it's like a really strong vocal piece, and it's just kind of eerie. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's a pretty cool moment. I do enjoy fighting Ebrietas. Any other optional areas in the game we missed? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think that covers everything other than DLC.
Should we? Do you want to jump into DLC before we do final bosses, or should we take on?
Let's actually do Gehrman first, because
Okay.
I actually think it works well that way. There's three endings to Bloodborne. Traditionally, like the games that came before it, there appear to be two at first. You can either have Gehrman essentially mercy kill you, release you from the dream, and you wake up on a new morning in Yharnam, which is, I actually really like that ending.
Hmm.
I really like that cutscene. The other is where you resist, and Gehrman is like, "Hey, if you're not going to let me cut off your head, I'll take it myself." And
Hmm.
that sad music comes in. It's like such a beautiful piece of music from the game, and there's like a real sadness to it, because Gehrman is like past his prime. He's seen crazy stuff. He's participated in like horrendous acts. He's alone. You can find him weeping in the chapel. I don't know if you ever came across that, but when you return to the hunter's dream, like you'll find him in a sleep, and he clearly doesn't sleep well,
Hmm.
because he's haunted by the fishing hamlet. And there's like a implication that he maybe had romantic interest for Maria, who was one of his pupils, and like that might have been unrequited.
Hmm.
And he fashioned the doll clearly in her likeness. It's basically the
Right.
same in-game model, right? So Gehrman is a pretty tragic figure, and he really is sort of like it's like the Night's Watch or something. Like he's sort of doing his shift. He's like serving his duty
Mhm.
in this hunter's dream, and he's such an interesting character. And I still think that boss fight rocks.
Oh yeah.
He's challenging, he's aggressive, he can get you. A parry boss, he's sort of like Gascoigne 2.0.
Yep, absolutely. It feels like Gascoigne 2.0, as far as his level of aggression, his movement patterns. A lot of these, hunter style fights have a similar, those NPC invasion style AI where they dodge a lot, they like to shoot their gun a lot. It's seemingly endless supply of ammo in certain scenarios. But yeah, I really enjoyed this fight too for very similar reasons as to why, we both enjoyed Gascoigne.
Yep. Well, and I love in Bloodborne, and this is something you'll have to play around with in the future, but you can cosplay all these bosses. So you
Hmm.
can get Gehrman's Burial Blade, which is one of the coolest weapons, I think, in the game. Not optimized in the way that the cleaver is, but it's just fun to use. It's
Yeah,
fun to have this big transforming scythe, and like you can get Gehrman's full set, and you could just play through the whole game like him.
mhm.
Or you could do that with Gascoigne. You can actually get the Beast Rune and the Beast Claw and the Hunter's Axe and Gascoigne's set, and you can fight exactly like Gascoigne, and you can transform your axe, and you can even transform into a beast when things get tough. So I love that about Bloodborne. You can of course do that in most of the Soulsborne games, but Bloodborne is like really conducive to it.
Hmm. Yeah, when I got kicked into my new game plus cycle, I immediately bought the burial blade and hit the streets of Yharnam with it. Gave it a test drive a little bit.
Yeah, it's a
It's
it's a
fun.
lot of fun. Yeah. So yeah, I mean you have those two endings, and of course you defeat Gehrman in battle.
Hmm.
You become the new Gehrman. The
Hmm.
moon presence comes down, and you lose your leg, and you're bound to the wheelchair, and the doll basically indicates that this cycle is going to start all over again.
Yep.
And that's what I think is interesting about characters like Eileen and stuff, because you kind of wonder, like, have they participated in this before you?
Right.
Kind of feels like they know some things, they've seen some things, and the game is very, very cyclical. So it's kind of a grim ending, like it's.
Hmm.
I actually think the Yharnam Sunrise ending is better than that one where you're just
Hmm.
you're just a slave like
Yeah.
Gehrman.
Yeah, it's interesting. And of course, in my playthrough, I got three of the umbilical cord, one third of the umbilical cord pieces.
Yeah, one
Um,
third of umbilical cords. It's
yeah,
really awkwardly like localized.
and I think
Yeah.
you can get like there are like four opportunities to
Hmm.
get them for some reason. It's like, okay, well, there are clearly four thirds of this umbilical cord. Don't
Yeah.
really understand what's going on there, but yeah. So I got the third ending.
Yeah, which I think the trophy is childhood's beginning.
Mm.
I think it's the best ending of Bloodborne. It's the secret ending, and where the moon presence comes down, but you resist and you
Hmm.
fight. And what did you think of the moon? Obviously, like it's a really cool design, and I think everybody remembers the moon presence for having that HP sapping attack where you just get
Yeah,
nuked. What'd you
yeah.
think of that fight though?
I really enjoyed it. It's not at the top of my list of favorites, but it's just such like it's like the climax of the whole story, right? It's like such a big moment, and to have it come down and then to actually fight it, it's hard not to love that, just the cinematic moment of fighting Moon Presence. And I had just obviously come off of, coming straight into it from the Gehrman fight, low on blood files, low on bullets, and I just kind of went for it, thinking that I'll probably have to come back and do this, but I was able to hang on by a thread. It's one of
Oh,
those
nice.
scenarios where you're on like two health, no blood vials. I still had like a solid sixth of its health bar left, and I was like, oh man, this is gonna be dicey, and clutched it out, and it was just like one of those like special moments where you clutch the victory, and then it's the final boss in the entire game. So super super memorable moment for me.
Yeah, it's kind of Elden Beasty in that way, isn't it? It's like that weird ending that you never saw coming, and it's like, what is this? What am I doing? And then,
Hmm.
yeah, at the end, you become the one to transcend, and you're reborn as a great one, and maybe instead of replacing Gehrman, you're now going to replace the moon presence. Yeah, it's a really Still kind of creeps me out, that cinematic though, where the doll picks up the little slug, and
Yeah.
it's something about it, like
It's
it's
pretty yeah, it's spooky.
it is spooky for sure. What is, just a super quick, like, what's
Mm.
your hot take on the doll? Is the doll malicious, benevolent? Is the doll a great one? Is the doll Oedon? Like, what's your take on the doll?
I don't know. I feel like it's been imbued with some of the Moon Presence's power to obviously kind of like take in these new to be hunters who are potentially replacements for Gehrman, and to almost foster you. Like there's some intention behind the doll's like found um, I don't know, intelligence, and I don't know. It is fascinating to try to think and like theorize why the doll is and like what's the force behind her. Yeah, I don't know. It could
Yeah,
it could be anything.
I don't think the doll is Oedon, because Oedon is like, Oedon is responsible for. Did you finish Ariana's quest?
Arianna died. I kind of her quest line got kind of convoluted for me, and I just assumed it was tied in with Iosefka in some regard. So I didn't get the full story behind Ariana's quest line.
Okay. Well, do you know what happens, or do you mind if I spoil it for
No,
you?
go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, my take is that Oedon essentially like impregnates her with a child, and she gives birth, and it's akin. And you find her sobbing with like this little alien baby next to her, and it's
Mm.
really messed up. It's just like, yeah, like I think Oedon is a very different kind of force in this game world. I do not believe Oedon is possessing the doll. There's definitely a case to be made that like the doll is malicious, and I think I like at points in time I've entertained that. I actually
Mm.
just think the doll is good natured, and I think the doll is there to help you. And
Mm-hmm.
I think what's interesting is with the doll, you're kind of interacting with Maria in a way, because you don't really know Maria in the game. Like Maria's not really around, but you're
Right.
interacting with someone who looks exactly like Maria and who's
Mm.
helping you, and seems really loyal. And she's like, again, she has this job in the hunter's dream, and she, does her duty. But no matter how you slice it, like crazy memorable, shrine maiden, or however you want to
Oh yeah.
categorize her, right? She's synonymous with the game. Like Bloodborne, the doll. It just, I think, From had, they set a pretty high bar, I think, with the Maiden in Black and Demon Souls. And then even the Emerald Herald in DS2, I really enjoy.
Hmm.
So yeah, they had their work cut out for him.
Yeah, they nailed it though. I think she's definitely one of the best quote unquote fire keepers that we've had.
Do you want to log out and log back in since we got 250?
Yeah, that sounds good. I'll go grab a glass of water here quick too.
Oh
So
yeah, no
cool.
worries. It's basically just DLC and like closing thoughts.
Yeah, let's do it up.
All
I'll
right.
see you in a sec.